Good morning, everyone. First of all, a pleasure to be here and presenting on the new strategy that look to up to the 2030 for the Emergency Medical Team Initiative. The first day I heard a lot about why actually we need to change, why there is a need of shifting the current thinking and mindset when it comes to disaster medicine. I will start with a brief introduction with a video that show where we started back from 2010 and obviously what is projections and plan for 2030.
12th of January, 2010. A catastrophic 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck Haiti. Despite the unprecedented international response, the lack of coordination urged WHO and partners to set standards and establish a coordination mechanism for foreign medical teams. May 2011, WHO creates a new work stream to prepare for and respond to health emergencies using an all-hazards approach. December 2011, the first working group on FMTs worked to develop registration procedures and minimum quality standards for the teams. May 2013. The WHO classification and minimum standards for emergency medical teams are released. November 2013. WHO standards are successfully used for the first time during the Super Typhoon Haiyan Philippines response, with 151 medical teams deployed and coordinated in the response. July 2014. WHO mobilized EMTs for the Ebola outbreak in West Africa with 58 teams deployed over the course of the multi-year response. January 2020. Before the novel coronavirus outbreak is declared as a public health emergency of international concern, WHO issues an alert to mobilize teams in response to what would become the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2021, the classification and minimum standards for emergency medical teams was updated with a much stronger focus on developing national emergency medical teams, shifting the focus from international teams. That same year, a guidance document for EMTs in armed conflicts and insecure environments was also launched. 2020 to 2021. Over the course of the first 2 years of the COVID-19 pandemic, over 1,000 national and international EMTs were surged in to provide hands-on support where most needed. Since February 2022, since the beginning of war in Ukraine, EMTs have operated to provide health services, support the health system, and help build Ukrainian EMT response capacity. Emergency medical teams provide direct clinical care to people affected by emergencies. All team members are fully trained, have the skills appropriate for the situation, and bring with them their own equipment and supplies.
So, as you have seen, the initial focus back in 2010 was clearly recognizing the need to identify standards for medical team, and in particular, the initial focus was for international response. So the idea of me with my international solidarity, with the one we see as well very recently during COVID, supporting countries, but then obviously there was a clear understanding that was not enough, the spirit of solidarity. So there was a need to come with clear terminology, language, and definition that would help those international teams to link up with the national system. So we are seeing in the presentation that focus come to how we can build a stronger health system, mobilize people where and if needed. When we look into some of the projections under 2030, there's recalculations 1.5 disasters per day. So I think 187 epidemic events we are registering per year. And we do have an increasing number of countries entering into what we call fragile and conflict-affected setting. And report as well as today of 103 million unforcibly displaced. So that's the reason actually why we start to look into those numbers, clear call for a change. So a shift in terms of the paradigm for international to support nationals and local. I want to make it clear, when I talk about national, we clearly refer to all type of local teams that can be, and I will use some example in my presentation specifically related to the recent events in Turkey and the Ukraine. So the focus, it's clearly targeting what you are doing as well every day for those that are working in the emergency department. So having a response that targets in a very timely way, appropriate, safe, thinking about safety. It's clear that all the strategy that I'm presenting today, it look to 4 major pillars. So what we are targeting, as usual, so we do have, we want to have humanized interventions. I think it was presented before the situation of Ebola, in which then we start to think back in 2014 and 15 as the focus on, obviously, provide care to the patients, but forgetting that obviously there is a lot of element of the family, the relatives, and the worker themselves that work within the facility. So that needs to be taken, obviously, into consideration when it comes to defining strategy and standard. Then it's clear that we all looking to improve better patient outcome. We consider the staff safety and well-being. And I think one of the points that I would stress, and probably is becoming the most important, is trying to reduce as well the costs related to those interventions. And that's where we have more work to do. And last one is the coordinated approach. It's becoming critical that country understand that any time that I do have, when it comes to internationals, and I will use the example of Turkey, the coordination of all relief and medical teams, it is a challenge. It is a challenge because most of the time, still today, the example of Turkey, those standards are applied in a different way, in a different manner, and the understanding as well of the services that can be offered by those international teams, it's not straightforward for those receiving the request of assistance. I already mentioned, so the focus of the initiative, it's shifted as well from the poor emergency response, in which I will present the case studies, as I said before, to capacitated or local and national teams to be able to respond on their own countries. We talk about climate change. We have seen today islands, Vanuatu, for example, Tonga in the Pacific Islands, that are able to, and being able to respond on their own, thanks obviously to the effort and the work that's been done in the last year. So it's an element of success, but then we have to stress the importance of continue working towards improvement of those capacities. And then the element important of standard setting and quality assurance. It's the initiative called for a change. So you have seen we presented a lot of standards for international team deploy. I think the nuances come how those processes can be set as well at country level to ensure that we do have validated capacity at country level that can respond in my province or at regional level. Try to, okay. So during the presentation, I will say as well the shifting. So I will present a lot of the technical standards. I think one of the key elements of the new strategy itself, when it comes to the technical core standard, look to how we can engage the WADEM, the different association, to try to advocate for, hey, validation of the standards and be the use of the standard when it comes to capacity building activities. So I referred at the beginning to the strategic evolution to national EMT capacities, nationals and local. I will use a lot the example of Turkey. This is, you can see, it's the latest response, in which there's been investment in the last year through their own system, that's called UMKE, in trying to ensure that across the different provinces, the capacities are built. When I'm referring to team as well, it's very important that we consider here that the team is the way we deploy those capacities, but behind those we call teams, there is 1,000 of workers that by the fact that are engaged on daily basis in the EMT system, gain additional knowledge and skills that can obviously benefit the health system when they work back in their own facility. One of the major gaps, and I'm glad to see, I heard the first day an example of, well, we do regular testing of the plan to increase capacities in our hospital. I'm very glad to hear, but the reality of today is that when we look into the emergency care and trauma system assessment that is regularly performed in different countries, the surge has a very minimum considerations at the level of facility as well as the level of system. There is the challenge is how I expand my, my facilities. I think we have been seeing the COVID response, which everybody's starting to learn how I can create my own treatment facilities. But I think there is a lot now to be done to maintain and sustain this, this knowledge gain. Then it's very important as well to realize that each emergency is unique. So we need to consider the different level of scenarios, and how we expand capacity depends a lot of different factors. As we know, one is the pre-existing capacities, the level of knowledge and skills, and I would use that specifically for the example of Ukraine. One of the key propositions, it's how we can build those capacities. So there is a discussion ongoing, and I think it's been mentioned the first day, around the concept of the global health emergency corps. We have proposed this 8th domain as the domain to build any type of rapid response capacities, and how this is reflected basically on you as individuals. I think the importance of applying the domain, it's at individual level and obviously at team. Major challenge when it comes to developing these capacities are what you can see on the borders of the cycle. So we do have challenges in establish appropriate legislations when it comes to mobilization and creations of those teams. There is a challenge in to understand exactly the concept of surge. And I would say, since we are here in the Congress, the definitions as well, what is a disaster medicine? How we define the disaster medicine? Very interesting conversation last week in Ukraine, because we are planning to looking back to review the disaster medicine competency framework, because it's the definition that was provided, the understanding across the different actors involved, it's vary according to their own knowledge, expertise, and as well as engagement with the system. Then there is important components I mentioned before about the coordination. The example of Turkey recently showed that a lot of effort had been put in place to ensure that the relief that was coming to the country was aligned with the request issued by the country, by the government. And I can say it was not always the case. Plus the elements that I will present in terms of the civil-military engagement. Yesterday was a very nice sessions on looking to how the two systems interact. If you take the example of Turkey, almost half, 40% of the teams deployed were military. And obviously the challenge was as well how I interact within a coordination system that was already engaged and run by the Ministry of Health. An additional strategic evolution, it's looking, as I say, from global international standards to adaptive standard at country level. So we say in the past, in particular as WHO, we're pushing a lot of this international standards, say this is what need to be applied, by default if you want to build such kind of capacity. It's becoming very clear that adaptation, it's a must, but it's not a process that comes by default. There is a lot of challenges of adapting what is being considered for international to my local context. And then we link a process of regionalizations. We are starting looking to within the initiative, and I think some of you here will be for sure part of this process of multi-country training hubs, using the WHO Collaborating Center basically to deliver those courses to build basically the capacity of each country. And then the idea as well of twinning. It's working significantly well, I would say, in particular in some of the African countries. Between, for example, Ethiopia's, it's one of the countries that have received most of the support, and most recently has already conducted 6 deployments within the country on their own. So I think those are success that need to be clearly remarked constantly. That's the status as well of Turkey. I will give a very brief presentations on the response itself. So as you can see, we have internationally, we have 38 teams that have the capacity basically to provide direct clinical care. There has been a significant effort put in place by the countries, thanks to the work that was done as I say, in the years back. The capacity clearly varied. The strategy adopted at that time was replacing those facilities that were not functional anymore. There was an important element that it was supposed to be taken into consideration at the time when all international teams were called. First of all, we look into an incredible capacity in terms of medical evacuation of the countries. I would probably not recall many countries that would be able to medically evacuate the patients, the number of patients that I will show you afterwards. Then you can see only through the national system, 34 field hospitals were basically set across all the 10 affected provinces. 176 emergency response units were set, as well as the personal accommodations unit. And you see as well the number of patients treated by those local teams. That it was the most incredible element. So when we look into the initial 48 to 72 hours of the earthquake, there's been the capacity to evacuate, I think at the time was 1,700 patients. So the most severe patients will be able to evacuate in the nearby provinces, leaving clearly the less severe patients in the affected provinces. That creates some tension when it comes to the deployment of international teams. Clearly, expectation when it comes to bigger facility was identify and treating most severe traumatic injuries, but those were actually evacuated to the neighboring facilities. The case of Ukraine as well. The current work is actually at the beginning, there was a lot of support, at least when it would come to the assistance from WHO in terms of from the EMT initiative, it comes to international support. Then currently there is ongoing work to the establishment and support of, as you can see, 25 local teams that are currently operating in a mobile form. And there is as well the setting up of 5 hubs for coordinations of the activations of those mobile teams. Which was a key challenge actually when it comes to the support provided. First of all, and it's something that we will have to look at together. So as of today, we have seen at least 5 different mass casualty management courses that were provided in Ukraine, and many of them were not aligned, were not providing the same support to the country itself. Then the biggest challenge was actually the interactions, obviously, as we've seen in previous situations between a militarized zone, a military versus a civilian system. Then clearly the particularity of the country, which rely a lot more into the sorting of the patients and triage the pre-hospital setting. So then the challenge is sometimes the problem is shift from there to the facility. You can see here there was the effort clearly were tried to put into the capacity of teams that go into area in which they're still at risk. And then there was the element as well, and that's probably the biggest lesson learned, and it's been presented as well yesterday, on the implementations of military trainings to a civilian system. We're currently starting to work into how those tactical casualty combat care, for example, should be adapted to a civilian system. That's actually was probably the biggest struggle when it comes to the current situations in Ukraine. So the point of regionalizations that I've heard, it's start to look into proximity and contextualizations of the training provided to emergency medical team, with ideas developing capacity. Before, Professor Moria referred to an all-hazard capacities. Today, the challenge remains when it comes to the outbreak response. The reality of many times the building up of treatment facilities is not streamlined together with the effort they are put in place when it comes to the surveillance, the detections, and investigations. So this alignment is definitely not there, and there is a lot of work to be done in ways to ensure that we streamline, as I say, detection, investigations, and the treatments. A lot of effort has been put, in particular now, into the African region and those countries that are most affected and at risk of outbreak. So the focus, obviously, towards the 2030, you can see it's quite a long list of work in progress that receive the support of many partners institutions, WHO collaborating centers. In particular, the first one, as I already mentioned, looking to strengthening the capacity of high infectious disease, in particular, in comes to the treatment capacities. Major investment on the pre-hospitals and medical evacuations in emergency. As I said before, what we have seen in Ukraine is the classic example of low-level skills that then being supported with training that don't match those capacities. A lot of effort has been put, in particular, in Europe on the treatment burns in mass casualty incidents. Very relevant, and it will be published very soon. Together with the colleagues of US CDC, we're working on how the emergency medical team and the public health rapid response team can be combined, aligned in terms of trainings, in terms of operational support and logistics. I mentioned already before about the civil-military interactions, and we launched 2 weeks ago a technical working group as well with colleagues from UN OCHA, and try to look into improving, as I say, the system between the civilian and military. In particular, look into 3 major elements: the collaborations, the coordinations, and the standards. I referred before, and I will have a slide, a very interesting slide presented by the colleague from Germany 2 weeks ago on their deployment to Turkey. Then I mentioned as well about the work on civilian system operating in semi- and non-permissive environments. A lot of work to be done. We're seeing as well today, unfortunately, the case of Sudan, and the challenges, obviously, to address that crisis. And the last, very relevant to our discussion, is more how we can look into a competency framework that address and clarify the element of disaster medicine. As I said before, multiple country, multiple questions, different answers. So I think there is probably a need, and that's the support that can become as well from the WADEM and other type of associations will be very critical. 2 weeks ago, we launched civil military technical working group. And very interesting, and I want you to take it, and thanks actually the German colleagues that they have presented on their experience when it comes to deployment to Turkey, and the linkages between a military team and the counterpart at the civilian level. You can see a call clearly for standards, means speaking the same language when it comes to the deployments. The parts of, well, I will leave out the value of WHO, but the importance actually of streamlining the work that comes between a clear work done at the military versus the work that is done at the civilian level. Then the importance as well of medical intelligence. I think before we talked a lot about from the surveillance perspective, but the reality is that there is not enough stress, the element of the importance of providing support when a level of information are provided in terms of type of services, conditions, context, and pre-existing capacities. Then we'll start looking to as well to a more flexible and tailored tailored solution. So what we're starting to call a more specialized care team. So you can see on the right side, you can see what our Turkish colleague came. So they took one of the setup was provided of their own facilities, and then they turned that into a pharmacy, because the pharmacy in that area was completely destroyed. Then started to look into all these factors that influence the decisions to build and then mobilize all these medical teams. Then a major investment as well, and it's been said before, and when it comes to the operational research and evidence, unfortunately, there's a very little when it comes to experience, when it comes to how I build those capacity in different countries. Then was Professor Citone presentations and during our global meeting last year at in Armenia. So the importance of investing into the data, and I think it's been said a lot before. Sometimes we are building capacities, but we are lacking a lot of evidence to support the changes and the shift in standards, technical understanding, and operationalizations of those standards. It's been shown as well before, and what I present is clearly aligned with all the key global agenda, starting from discussions that probably many of you have heard about the new health architecture for preparedness, response, and resilience that's will be discussed as well at the coming World Health Assembly. Then in line with clearly the Sendai framework that's been presented, the Sustainable Development Goals, and as well as the international health regulations. The strategic alignments go as well to what is referred to the Global Health Emergency Corps I mentioned before, and as well as clear definitions when it comes to when I build a certain capacity, how I define my medical team in terms of terminology, how I define my public health rapid response team, what is the role of mobile lab, how I would build a specialized care team, then what is the role of the use of individuals deployments. There is a challenge obviously as well there that we are trying to address when it comes to in the way I showed before in terms of the use of the 8 domain. The launching of the strategy and what I present is clearly being done in Armenia, and this is what our Director General, Dr. Tedros, highlight in the role of the emergency medical team post the COVID-19 pandemic, and the idea of building those capacity at local level using clear the experience of capacity or what has been already done through the Emergency Medical Team Initiative since its inception. So looking to the 2030, clearly there are four critical objectives to put forward. The first one I already mentioned, the importance of partnerships. So we are looking more to say we are not only an initiative that build those teams and isolations, but we want to look into more support from institutions, the academic, that they can basically, the academia, sorry, they can basically provide and facilitate the definition of the technical standards, B, the delivery as well of training and courses, and third, the disseminations as well of the objective of the initiative itself. The third one, as mentioned, is the standardizations and the use of the quality assurance process at national level. Let's go beyond the purpose of all international teams. And the last element, look into improving the evidence and research. Thank you so much. Stop here. Where you can find the logo of the initiative, and obviously looking forward to collaborations as well with the WADEM. Thank you.
Ooh. Can I get you to join me, Flavio? We'll have a fireside chat. So there is a huge volume of information in this, and it certainly has advanced a long way since the heady days of 2010 back in Haiti. I was interested in one of your slides there just about a handover plan. And do you have any guidance documents on producing the handover plan? And is it different for the sudden onset confined disaster versus the prolonged sustained disaster, which has an infrastructural element as well?
Yeah, we are basically coming out with the already template that's been used and provided to international teams at this stage. There is a clear definition, the differences between the response to the Turkey, for example, or today the cholera response in Malawi. So the template is adapted to the context, addressing as well the element of the challenges we have seen since 2010. The reality is that most of the deployments have not then communicated back to local authorities when it comes to what they have done, what has been the challenges, what is the remaining gaps seen in the response. Give you an example, 2015 Nepal, when we look into donation provided by many of the teams, I think 50% were not aligned at all with what the country was needed. Okay. And it was very difficult as well to be incorporated into the role of the local system.
Yeah. Professor Gawa.
Shinji Gawa from Tohoku University. Thank you for the very nice presentation. And my question is about the role of researchers. And when you say that research is critical to improve the procedure, but when you operate on the ground, where is the place for the researchers or data takers? Or, how do the real responders keep the records of the patient's treatment number or any kind of background data to be analyzed lately to improve that procedure was right or not? So that how do you think about the role of researchers in the real operational situation? But probably no researchers will go together in the Ukraine situation for their own safety, and they are not trained to do that. However, but how they can get the data from that situation?
Thanks. So in the building up of these 8 domains, there is a lot of recommendations on how you use and build your system for data collections. We do have, including as well, a system for reporting back to what's called a minimum data set to the coordination systems. There is as well a recommendation in terms of what the data protections, what should be done by the team prior to conduct any type of research. It's clear as well, to many of you as well, sometimes those research, and Ukraine could be a case, comes out, but there is not much engagement with the local authority. So that's validity should be probably questions, in particular probably from the ethical standpoint.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. This is Hamdi Lamin from Crimidim, Italy. Well, I have a question that is related to Prof. Malloy's comment previously. So there were an abstract that was published in the last EMT global meeting, and I'm just reading the title here. What happens after they all go, addressing the gap between field hospital departure and restoration of local health facilities following sudden onset disasters. I'm just curious to know if this kind of gap after the EMT leaves and the state of the countries and the preparedness of the countries, is this addressed in the next strategy of the EMT? Is there something that we can do to address this specific gap? Thank you.
Thanks. So I think the article is, it's actually, the abstract is very interesting. I would say that the point is the exit strategy when it comes from the coordination perspective from day one. So the design of the strategy, for example, Turkey already consider location of field hospitals, internationals in particular, and the practice of the handover, when the handover should be happening to the local system. So the level of integration in reality is already present. The question is apply those principles when it comes to the response itself. The Turkey and the map that I show, many of the facility has been donated and today are still functioning using local staff. As I said before, the strategy was specifically replacing big hospitals with field hospitals. The local workforce was still present. The challenge was for them at the beginning was to operate because they have to take care as well of family and relative in the affected province. But then clearly after weeks, they came back and the facility was operated by them.
Madam.
Hello, my name is Anna Eriksson. I work at the Karolinska Institute in Sweden. So thank you for the presentation, and I kind of followed the FMT, EMT process a bit from the side and through my closer colleague, Johan from Trier, who's been very instrumental in this. And I wanted to ask you the same question that I keep asking him, which is more about it is impressive and looking at the number of teams and national teams, but still, how do we ensure that we're relevant? Where is the decision about where to go and when? Is it only about invitation from a country? Because I can't help but looking at Turkey and Syria, who experienced the same type of earthquake. Now we're looking at Sudan, but there's also other conflict-affected countries where there's never been, as far as I know, any discussions about sending EMTs or empowering local or national EMTs. So I'm just, is this the way forward? Is this how we're going to work with humanitarian and medical assistance wherever there is a disaster? Or is this one of many possibilities to actually assist people in different types of disasters?
Thanks. I think that the solution is not considering the initiative as in silos. So I think the big shift now the EMT initiative should be part of your health system. So I would like to probably present the case of India, in which in January under the G20, they launched basically their own national EMT initiative. So that means not only building a team here and there, but establish what I presented. So a coordination system at central, coordination system at state level, building teams at state level that are clearly a match between local hospitals, clinics, private facilities, in way to define when and how to activate them. So I think that should be the first. So not considering that as FMT situations, but as part of the health system. The same case was in Ukraine. So you have seen, so the work of Ukraine considered the emergency medical services, and on top the addition of EMT in terms of expanding the capacity of the EMS when it comes to certain events. In Sudan is the classic case of currently supporting some local organizations. The challenge remains access for internationals. There's no flight, there is no possibility to enter, and the risk is quite high. But at the local level, the importance as well of creating a network, give the facility for us to interact and provide what is possible to do today.
Sir.
Hi, I'm Aaron Igalko. I am also at Karolinska. I have a question about transportation systems because I think it makes sense to have EMTs flying in, be self-sufficient with their own medical supplies, but it's hard to fly in several ambulances, and I think there's also an inefficiency if each EMT is trying to coordinate their own pre-hospital and inter-hospital transport. So do you think there's a role for WHO or some more zoomed out kind of coordination of just transportation from patients between these different steps?
Thanks. Yes, it's been the case as well in less in WHO in Turkey, because it was done by the locals. The provision of ambulance, yes, that was the case of the possibility to provide. The same in Ukraine, and I do believe it's for sure the next step. So we are not pushing for sure international to come with their own ambulance, what should be probably leave to the local system, but the coordination, as you say, become critical.
Jacoby.
J.G. Kilby, U.S. Disaster Medical Assistance Team. Could you comment a little bit about whether when disaster teams are either professional and paid as opposed to teams that have strictly volunteers on them that are unpaid, is that tracked by any of the statistics that is tracked by the WHO? Have there been differences noted in the capabilities of those teams? Wondering about your observations over several disasters as to whether that is a factor.
Yeah, I mean, we do have that level of information, but to be honest, I'm not sure that affect the capability of the teams. For sure, the ability to mobilize quickly, yes, because we do know many of the teams that work on voluntary base, obviously the availability of the volunteers depends on the day-to-day jobs, while those that they have a more, in particular governmental team, that they have more a clear structures with on-call, with the possibility to be released immediately, have the ability and capacity to mobilize faster. Would be very interesting, actually, as you mentioned, we could look to that and see in terms of not only the activation itself, and maybe the performance, if you want to, yeah, this would be an interesting one.
There's another interesting addition to that, then, looking at the fitness. There isn't a fitness criteria standard. You go to the military, you go to any active service units, and you have a fitness standard you have to achieve. And when you look at the reports back out from some of the disasters, 10% of the staff involved, or 10% of the patient load ends up being some of the staff that are involved in the incident themselves. So it's another thing we need to look at. How do we keep people safe and make sure they're fit and capable to do the work in a disaster zone and unstable ground, etc. Sir.
Elkhan Baron from Israel. Turkey was a good example, was an example of a disaster in a with a country with very high capabilities, both of treatment and of evacuation. Most of our deployments will be in countries which are much smaller and with much less resources, and the EMT initiative, which I'm part of, has responded with regionalization. And I think that's an important aspect. If you could add a few words on that, please.
Yeah. So thanks. It's definitely the regionalization bring more countries that share the common interests, the language. I mean, comes more together, easier to connect, easy to respond, and easy to train on regular basis. That's, I think, was the case of Turkey. The idea of stressing the fact, I think one of the important elements you were mentioning about the challenge of the staff. I think one of the important elements of the EMT is not the language and the way I call it the teams. The question is more how I do apply the standard and the principle in a systematic way. And unfortunately, you see countries that probably are still too much attached to the name and the network rather than thinking about the importance of apply certain principle and their own technical standards.
Sure. Anna.
Hi, my name is Maggie Mitchell. I'm a physical therapist in the emergency department in the United States. I want to reference one of the kind of models that you included folks who get deferred or delayed or ignored outright. What I'm wondering is if there is a way to bring in our rehabilitation specialists earlier, maybe to treat those patients to avoid developing into long-term disability, or if there's room within the WHO model for our EMTs to not leave rehabilitation as a specialty unit, but integrate them into our type 1 and type 2 teams more.
Can
Thanks.
I just take something? I don't think there's any suggestion ever that the greens are left and never treated. So I think there may be a misconception in that they're not told to walk away. They're registered, tagged, triaged, and brought in as part of the incident. So greens, when you go through a triage system, they're not told you're not going to get any attention, go away. They are going to get treated. The issue is for some people who are involved in the incident who never present, they just disappear themselves, which is different. But the fact that they've mobilized themselves away means they're less likely to have significant injury needing long-term rehab. But just to get away from that concept that the greens don't get treatment, they do. They do get treated. Sorry.
You answered though.
Yeah.
No, just to complement, yeah, we are very promoting actually early rehabilitation. So if you look to the standards, the inclusion come from the type 1 and for sure from the type 2 capacities. Your facility, the second one in the referral that you have seen, there is a lot of stress in terms of having a physical rehabilitation presence, investing as well in modifying your patient pathways, and all that is already included. I think that's more referring to the situation of a conflict in which we know that a big percentage will require long-term rehabilitations, and that's why we include that as a core component of your trauma pathway. But it's definitely there, and it's, you can check in our old standards.
So I'm going to give Professor Barak the last question, even though we are over time. I'm not going to do it to you 2 days in a row.
And we start early as well.
Flavio, thank you. Paul Barish from the U.S. We've discovered in hospitals and pre-hospitals that 20% of care falls short or causes harm because of failed teams. Subsequently, we've developed a competency-based model for training hospital and pre-hospital teams. So it's a psychometric-based teams on knowledge, skills, and attitudes. How does that come into place in the EMT? So not just groups of people coming together. Well, that's important. We've discovered that teams are often groups of individuals that don't perform very well unless there's a cognitive-based model in which they're trained, assessed, and accredited, and refreshed on a regular basis. How do we incorporate that into the pre-hospital EMT model so these teams are measured for their performance and get active feedback so they can learn to improve? Thanks.
Well, I can definitely buy in the sense that the model of the 8 domain I presented incorporate that approach to all type of team. And I would say there's a lot more work to be done to apply that in a pre-hospital setting, even in a more standardized way, and not only for a big catastrophic events. It's already proposed in our, for example, classification system. There is obviously a cross-check in terms of the training approach, the way the staff is selected, the way that the staff is regularly trained, the check of the credentials, and the importance of simulation exercises. All of that is already part of the approach itself. The question will be how we can make sure that this is systematically applied across country and system. It's the way I want to advocate for.
Yeah, I guess related to that is that unless you train regularly, you can't perform well. So correct. How does this become part of their regular day-to-day activity? So it's not a once in a blue moon, but every day they train this way, so then they're ready to deploy in different units or different structures, but with similar building block competencies.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks.
Thanks.